Bitcoin is pumping, and it's really happening. Donald Trump is saying something again that's making the markets pump right now. Additionally, we see Russia actually using Bitcoin for international oil trade. This was officially confirmed by Bloomberg in order to circumvent sanctions. We see that BlackRock is buying now, we see that Cathie Wood is buying, we see that Michael Saylor has not yet announced a massive new purchase, but we are already seeing the on-chain shifts that he has just bought. Bitcoin again. It's really intense what's going on in the background, and a lot of people are still bearish, but it now looks like we might be able to slowly turn ourselves out of the down phase. The danger has not yet been completely eliminated. It could happen at any time that we crash down again or something like that. But right now, it definitely looks really, really good. We have a lot of positive things to look at. The money supply is exploding. We're seeing that liquidity is coming back into the market. Gold is at a new all-time high. I also have a really interesting chart that shows that the Bitcoin bull run might not have actually started yet. But before we take a look at what Donald Trump said, because he made a massive statement here, and shortly after that, Bitcoin exploded back up. Or what I mean by exploded, but 5% isn't too bad on a daily basis. Oftentimes you make bullish news and Bitcoin goes down, then you make bearish news and Bitcoin goes up. There's often a correlation. So I really hope I'm not making a bullish video, uploading it, and then Bitcoin drops or something like that. That can happen from time to time, and we're about to take a look at what led to this. But first, we see that there are massive purchases happening again. Here, Cathie Wood is buying 80 million in Bitcoin, and this is really something special because it's not the clients of ARK Invest who are buying. It's actually ARK Invest itself purchasing nearly 1,000 Bitcoin for their own fund. So they themselves are now convinced of Bitcoin. So ARK Invest or BlackRock or something like that, they buy Bitcoin here. It is always the customers who buy Bitcoin here, but what is happening here now is that ARK Invest itself is buying Bitcoin just like BlackRock does from time to time, for example. We also see that BlackRock is buying again now. You can see that from the Arkham numbers, i.e. from the Arkham on-chain shifts. You can see that BlackRock has also bought Bitcoin here. This means that they will report tomorrow that they have made Bitcoin purchases here. And then we have another big purchase, this time from Michael Saylor. His strategy may have involved buying more Bitcoin this week, according to an on-chain analyst. And I've heard people say, yeah, Michael Saylor is running out of cash, he can't raise capital anymore, and so on. But it looks like he actually made another move and bought Bitcoin, which is really bullish. This also explains why things are starting to go up again, because the buyers are back. And then, just about 2 hours ago, something happened, and shortly after that, like half an hour later, the Bitcoin price went up when people realized this. I mean, it doesn't always have to be a one-to-one correlation. That's just one reason. There could be other reasons we'll get into shortly. But anyway, according to the Kobesai letter, President Trump says he had very good and productive talks with Putin yesterday, and there's a very good chance that the war will end. Trump has asked Putin to spare Ukrainian lives. So, as already mentioned in the last videos, if there were to be peace here, a ceasefire or whatever, then there are always very, very good arguments to pump up the markets here. On the other hand, we always see that when conflicts arise again, when there's war, or when new conflicts pop up, the markets tend to go down first, and that would mean a bit of relief for the markets. So yeah, I'm also a big supporter of peace, and I always find it really concerning when a lot of money packages are being pushed again, not just in Europe, in Germany, and so on, to keep building up the war machinery. So yeah, anything that leans towards peace is definitely a positive thing. Donald Trump made another announcement, saying that the US economy is going to boom like never before. If that's true and he's right about this, it would be great for the stock markets. I mean, Donald Trump talks a lot, and you have to keep that in mind. Whether it actually happens is another question, but you have to admit he has followed through on some of his campaign promises, just with a bit of a delay. For example, he said, yeah, we're going to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but that didn't happen on day one. It got pushed back a bit. With Ross Ulbricht, it came like 2 or 3 days later, and so on. That means that something has always been dragging on here and that. Is simply the story here with Donald Trump, and we have to continue to observe it. So if that happens, it would be bullish for the markets. Firstly, peace is over here. Secondly, a strong economy. The US economy would also be bullish for the stock markets and therefore also for Bitcoin. And then there was actually a very exciting report that Russia is now using Bitcoin for international trade. They're not using Bitcoin directly, meaning they're not just sending Bitcoin back and forth. This mainly involves China, Russia, and I believe India. Yeah, exactly, China, Russia, India. And Russia is still being sanctioned internationally, so it's somewhat difficult for them to conduct transactions. This is actually what I said back then. It was absolute nonsense for Biden to impose those sanctions because, first, it weakened trust in the US, and second, it pushed Russia towards Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and so on. And maybe, just maybe, Russia is now increasingly relying on Bitcoin. There are more and more reports about this, and just 2 days ago, There was news that Russia is opening up, with the central bank setting up a test phase to experiment with Bitcoin and so on. And now it's moving forward that they're using Bitcoin for international trade, and it simply doesn't work by using Bitcoin as the main medium, for example. Russia is now sending Bitcoin to China, and then China is sending Bitcoin back to Russia or something like that, because we still have the issues with Russia being sanctioned and so on. So Russia has come up with options like, okay, what can we use? They're using intermediaries, and these intermediaries receive the Bitcoin, swap it back and forth, and then it gets converted back into local fiat currencies. That means Russia now wants to trade with China. Then Russia takes the rubles, sends them to an intermediary, the intermediary swaps them into Bitcoin, the Bitcoin is then sent to China. In China it is then exchanged back into yuan. It is swapped, or rather the intermediary swaps it from Bitcoin into yuan, and Bitcoin is then used here as a pathway, as a railway, and I could also assume that, or I might not even bet on it, but under certain circumstances the Lightning Network could even be used here, because then it would work even faster, and if you don't use the Lightning Network then it just takes a bit longer. So it really depends on whether they need real-time transfers. If they do, then they'll use the Lightning Network, and if they don't need real-time transfers, they'll just do it on-chain. And that's already a really strong signal showing the potential of Bitcoin, especially when you're making really large transactions. I understand the argument, yes, if you buy a coffee on-chain, then it doesn't make sense. I mean, that's what the Lightning Network is for. And then someone criticizes it, saying that the Lightning Network doesn't really work, and so on. The argument is partly bullshit, and I understand it partly, but mostly it's the wallets or the users that don't really work. But when you're making Bitcoin transactions on a larger scale, there really aren't any arguments against it. For a big transaction, let's say worth several billion, even a 10 or 20 minute wait on-chain isn't really a problem because you're transferring massive values. In fact, it can even be better to do it on-chain, because the security is just that much higher. By the way, if you're looking for a good way to manage your Bitcoin, I'll drop a link below to a TREZOR hardware wallet. It's super simple and secure. Not only can you store your Bitcoin, but you can also send it to the network, sign transactions, and so on. You just need a signing device like a TREZOR, so I'll link that for you below. You can get 10% off a purchase of a TREZOR hardware wallet with the code BitcoinHotel, all in lowercase. And then we have an interesting graphic here showing that the global money supply has now reached a new all-time high. That means not only has gold reached a new all-time high, but so has the global money supply. And it's crazy when you look at how the Bitcoin price always follows the global money supply. Here in blue, we see the global money supply, and in black, we see the Bitcoin price. And we always see that Bitcoin adjusts to the money supply, either with a bit of a delay or a bit in advance. And we can actually speculate that it's going to go back up now. Sure, there can still be small pullbacks and so on, but the money supply is really the key factor to consider in the Bitcoin space, in the general crypto space, and in the overall risk sentiment. That means all risk assets depend on the money supply, but Bitcoin is the most affected, with an 82% correlation. And then I found a really interesting chart here showing Bitcoin versus gold. This chart suggests that the bull run hasn't even started yet. So we haven't really broken out in terms of gold yet. This means the breakout hasn't really happened yet. And we can see that in the past cycles, how Bitcoin first formed its new all-time high when measured in gold, and only then did the bull run start. And we see that this was always the case in the previous cycle and the one before that. This means that just before reaching the old all-time high, when measured in gold, the Bitcoin price shot up. And that's exactly where we are right now. We've dropped a bit again, as you can see here. But if we rise again now, we would essentially be back at the gold-denominated all-time high, and then the Bitcoin price would have to rise. I mean, we're seeing gold performing really, really well right now, and it's really strong and all. And you could certainly consider a multi-strategy like that, i.e. gold and Bitcoin, because both have a certain degree of independence from governments, and so on. But if we really drift into a bull run like that, and liquidity really comes onto the market on a massive scale, then Bitcoin Gold will very likely outperform massively here too. We've seen this in recent bull runs too, that gold actually had no chance of keeping up with Bitcoin, but of course in certain crisis scenarios and such, gold might perform a little better and perhaps not have such extreme volatility. That's just for boomer investors or something like that who somehow completely panic, or not just boomer investors, investors in general who panic when there is high volatility. They might then get gold, but as I said, you can have both. And now we really need to take a look at something huge that makes me super bullish. Donald Trump has already said he wants to mine all the remaining Bitcoin here in the US, and a lot of people still haven't really caught on to the whole mining business. A friend of mine has actually just traveled to the USA, here from TerraHash. Fabi here from TerraHash. You are welcome to stop by TerraHash. They have really cool mining stories and so on, and they really want to get mining going here in the USA. And what he's reporting here, I've cut the video in for you. What he shares is truly Absolutely insane, and shows the incredible potential that's still ahead of us and how Bitcoin can indeed really solve significant real-world problems.
So hey, a lot of people can't really wrap their heads around Bitcoin mining. Greetings from the US, by the way, right in the middle of nowhere. I'm here at an appointment, meeting with an energy producer, a 200 megawatt solar wind grid. Behind me is the substation. I hope you can see it. It's crazy. And here we're going to have a bit of a discussion. There are already many Bitcoin miners in talks to take on the excess capacity.
So you can already hear it. We're talking about excess capacity, which means electricity that isn't being used, that can't be fed into the grid, or that would just go to waste. In some cases, you even have to pay negative electricity prices to find buyers. And there are already a ton of different things being discussed. They're even speculating about whether the strategic Bitcoin reserve in the US can be further built up by simply subsidizing Bitcoin mining or making it cheaper through some really light regulations. And part of this excess Bitcoin mining will then be used to flow into the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and the rest can be kept by the miners themselves. You might not have to pay taxes or whatever on that. There are certain incentives or something like that. That could definitely be the case. Some have actually said it would be budget neutral to use Bitcoin mining by opening it up to the public, and then we could build up the strategic Bitcoin stock. But now here comes the really crazy part. Check this out.
So I'm checking in again. We've been on the road for about 2 hours now. A huge area, 25 square kilometers, fully built out with wind and solar, also paired with natural gas, and it has the potential to expand up to 6 gigawatts. That's about, say, between 6 and 3 nuclear power plants worth of capacity. Here you can see a total financing of several billion. So it's really, really big. Now here's the question. How do you monetize? How can we finance the project as quickly as possible and bring in some cash? It's quite interesting here. The feed-in points behind me have been in planning for 3 years. The funny thing is that this planning has to be pre-financed, meaning a deposit of several million has to be put down, and the energy could theoretically be generated, but it can't be fed into the grid because the studies from the grid operator aren't finished yet. So you can already see this is a similar topic to what we have in Germany. Anyway, the question now is, can Bitcoin mining act as a buyer of last resort? The price is good. We're talking around 4 cents, 24/7. No curtailments. But of course, these are scales that we just don't know from Germany or Europe. We're talking about, let's say, a higher double-digit megawatt range that is ultimately being contracted here. So starting at 500 megawatts, it's around 3 cents. Super exciting, super exciting. There are a lot of negotiations happening behind the scenes. I'm really curious to see what comes out of this in the end. And for us personally, the question is, can we get in on this somehow?
So I would definitely say super bullish. Hit that like button if you're just as bullish on Bitcoin mining as Fabi is. So I'd say, hey guys, I'm signing off. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about the current situation here. Do you see Bitcoin pumping again, or do you still see very, very big risks? Check out 21 Bitcoin too. Here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Here you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. And yeah, that was basically it. Catch you later. Peace out.